evening. I'm Maria Logus, National Philoptochos President, and once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our continuing lecture series addressing a wide range of topics of interest and importance to all of us. I'd like to thank our, shall we call it, our live in-person audience here today. Joining us tonight, of course, we're very honored by his presence, is His Grace Bishop Apostolos. And I'd also like to thank all of you who are joining us virtually via Facebook, and I'm happy to hear that Facebook is back in business today. Tonight we are honored to have with us Yvette Manessis Corporon, a three-time Emmy Award-winning writer and producer. We'll talk about her television experience privately. Who's here to discuss her book, Something Beautiful Happened, a story of survival and courage in the face of evil. One reviewer observed that something beautiful happened. I put down something wonderful, but something beautiful happened is a, quote, nuanced story about the power of faith, the importance of kindness, and the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. I will add my personal review. It stands up to all of that and more. Something Beautiful Happened brings light to an important part of our history, not necessarily universally known, but certainly one that we should all know about. Please welcome Yvette Manessis Corporon.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Hi, everyone. Hi, and hi, everyone at home. Thank goodness Facebook is back on today. You're absolutely right. Maria, your Grace, Amy, everyone here, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm so excited and honored to be here to share my family story and the story of Something Beautiful Happened with all of you in this room and everyone at home, of course. So thank you for tuning in and for being here. It's really kind of interesting because I love it when I'm among my people, because I've been very fortunate. The response to this book has been extraordinary, not only here in New York, but across the US, across the world. I've been honored to speak all across the world, sharing our family story. But I always have to start by saying, you have to understand something about me. I'm Greek. So there might be tears. I might get a little emotional. My arms will be flailing and I'll be talking really fast. But I can't help myself because that's who I am and that's who we are, right? And I always have to explain that to people, but I don't have to explain that tonight because you all get me. And we might all be flailing our arms and we might all be in tears, but we'll be doing it together. So that's okay, and that's what really matters. So thank you for being here to share all this with me. I do always get emotional. In fact, my kids always have a running bet. They're like, oh, Mom's talking again. And they have an over-under on how long it takes me to start crying. The record was 15 seconds. When I spoke in Kansas at the JCC, which you'll hear more about later, the record was 15 seconds for me to burst into tears. But I'm going to try to beat that record tonight. I know we can do it. Anyway, it always is so meaningful for me to share this story because for me, and I will explain the genesis of this book in a bit, but this is a very personal story for me, and it's my family's story. But it's also a story that's much bigger than me or my family, and a story of I now understand of global significance, and I didn't understand that when I was growing up. And that was my own personal journey that I'm here to share with you tonight. So I guess the journey begins when I was a little girl. I grew up, and I have some family here tonight. Hello, Perry. Perry's actually the godson of my grandparents, who you're going to hear so much about tonight, so even more meaningful tonight to have Perry here with us. So I was born in the Bronx, like so many children of Greek immigrants, that's right. And I was raised in New Rochelle, New York, Holy Trinity Church in New Rochelle. Many of you know Father Nick, and before him, Father Peter. And I grew up in New Rochelle in a wonderful community, but it was not a very Greek community. It was a real all-American, heavy Jewish community. And I, for a very long time, was the only Greek girl in the school. Eventually, another friend came to join me, so there were 2 Greeks in the school. That was a lot. The ratio changed. But like many of you in this room and all of our children, every Wednesday I was shipped off to Greek school, right, which I did not like. And all of my friends went to Hebrew school. And I wanted to go to Hebrew school because I wanted to be like everybody else, but I had to go to Kyrialiki's Greek school and learn my alphabetas. So I did. But that wasn't the only way that our family was different. I am the daughter of immigrants. Both of my parents were born and raised in Greece. They came here, they met here, they married here, truly lived the American dream. And like so many of you in this room and at home, you know what it is, right? To live that American dream and to be a child of immigrants or of a family of immigrants. We love both of our cultures, right? We love them dearly. But sometimes you're not quite sure how you fit in. And that was my experience growing up, because I saw all of my friends, right? This all-American community, and they had grandmothers, boobies or nanas, who took them to Bloomingdale's, who summered or wintered in Boca, right? And made peanut butter fluff sandwiches. Dinafto peanut butter fluff. Could you imagine Yaya making peanut butter fluff sandwiches? Yaya was making like spanakopitang psarosupa. You've probably tasted my Yaya's spanakopitang psarosupa. Anyway, so I had a very different experience. I loved my grandmother dearly. After my papu died, Yaya came and lived with us. She wore the mavra and the madili, right? Traditional fashion, and she came and lived with us. And my Yaya was the most warm and wonderful person in the world. She didn't speak a word of English, even though she lived in this country for 40 years, but she could tell you what was happening on all my children. Like, so that was like a Yaya superpower, right? It was. It's a total Yaya superpower. They never learned English, but they knew all the soap operas. Well, that was my Yaya. And my friends would come over to the house, and she didn't speak English again, but she would say, "Hello, dalimu. I'll go make them something to eat." They never asked, but she just did, because that's who she was. She couldn't wait to give. She had so little, but what little she had, she wanted to give. But isn't that also what it is to be Greek? When we're not flailing our arms and crying, right? We're giving, philotimo. That's what it means to be Greek, and that is what is ingrained in each and every one of us, in our DNA. Well, that was ingrained in my Yaya. She was from a little tiny island off the coast of Gergera, off the coast of Corfu, called Erikusa. Now, this is a tiny, tiny little island, right? And no one had any wealth on this island. It was very primitive. It was very provincial. They had nothing, but they had everything, because they had each other, and they had wonderful, full lives filled with love. Love for their faith, love for their culture, love for one another. And things were difficult. And my Yaya, after my papu died and she came to live with us, loved nothing more than to share with me stories about life back on Erikusa during the war. My papu, like so many of the men of his generation, left Greece to come to America to what? To build a better life for us, right? The reason we're all here today. They came to build a better life for us. They took a chance. My papu left Yaya back on Erikusa with 2 small children, and then war broke out, and he couldn't come back. Again, this story is not unique. So Yaya was left on this island, on Erikusa, with her family, the extended family, right? Because no one's ever alone in a Greek village, right? You have everybody taking care of each other. But she was left alone with 2 small children, my father and his sister, during first the Italian occupation and then the German. And life was very, very difficult for all of them. So my Yaya, when I was growing up in New Rochelle, lived with us, and when she wasn't cooking or watching all my children, she loved to share with me stories about what life was like back on Erikusa during the war. And she would tell me all these stories. And one of the stories that she liked to share most was the story of Savas Israel. Now, Savas was a Jewish tailor on the main island of Corfu, right? How many people didn't even stop to think that they were Greek Jews? Well, many people don't know that there are Greek Jews, but yes, there are Greek Jews. And there was a thriving community of Greek Jews all across Greece. And in Corfu, there were about 2,000 Greek Jews. Right? Yes, Saloniki, all over Greece. And in Gergera, there was a community of about 2,000 Greek Jews right in the center of town, right? They lived in what we now call the Jewish ghetto, the Evraiki. And Savas Israel was a member of this community, and he was beloved. In fact, he was called Papa Savas because he was so warm and welcoming that they would joke that the Jewish tailor was like a priest. And actually, his specialty was clerical garments. He would make clerical garments for the clergy and also for all of the islanders of Erikusa, right? They didn't have much money, they didn't have much, but when they could cobble together enough money, they would get on the boat to the main island to go visit Savas in his shop, and he would make an article of clothing for them. My Yaya was one of them. So over the years, they got to know one another. Savas had 3 daughters, Julia, Spera, and Nina. And those 3 daughters became friends with not just my Yaya, but the entire community of Erikusa. They did business together, they became friends. They learned to depend and love one another. They depended on one another. Well, Yaya would tell me stories about how, during the war, Savas and his girls managed to escape the extermination of Jews of Corfu. There were 2,000 Jews of Corfu, we said, right? Of the 2,000 Jews of Corfu, 1,800 were exterminated, sent to Auschwitz and exterminated by the Nazis. 121 came back, right? 121 came back from the 2,000. Others were hidden and saved by their Christian friends. Well, Savas and his daughters managed to escape the carnage on Corfu. They somehow made it to Arequipa, and the islanders of Arequipa, including my Yaya and our extended family, took them in and helped hide and save them. Now, I always am very clear about this. This was a community effort. Yes, my Yaya would tell me this story. My Yaya had a big mouth, and I inherited her big mouth, obviously, because now I'm telling the story. But it wasn't just my family, it was the entire community. The Nazis knew that there were Jews hidden on Arequipa because they had census, right? They would have lists of names, they would check off the names, and they knew that there were people who escaped the carnage. They would come to Arequipa searching for Jews. My father was 9 at the time, 9, and he remembers the sound of Nazi boots stomping outside of the door. He remembers Nazis in our home, ransacking and yelling and searching and saying, "Where are the Jews? We will kill you, we'll kill your family, we will burn down this entire island." They didn't do this only in my house. They did this house to house to house across the island. Now remember, Savas and his girls, and also a young girl, there was a 9-year-old girl whose entire family was murdered. Her name was Rosa. Savas brought her as well and told everyone that was his granddaughter. So they were all hiding on Arequipa. The Nazis went searching door to door, threatening to murder everyone on the island. Guess what the islanders of Arequipa did? Not one person on the island gave up the secret. Everyone kept quiet. And when they knew that the records kept on the island could perhaps alert the Nazis to who was a Christian and who was a Jew, do you know what they did? They burned the records. There are no records from the island of Arequipa to this day from that time, because rather than give up their friends, everyone on Arequipa, even those who didn't want them there, because it wasn't safe, right? It was dangerous. And these were not idle threats. Everyone at that point knew what the Nazis were doing, what they were capable of. But despite the risk, everyone kept the secret and burned the records of their families generations back to save their friends. Now, this is one of the stories that my Yaya would love to tell me when I was growing up. And she would tell me, Savas, they were my friends, they would come every night, they would knock on the door. Now remember, she was alone with 2 children. My grandfather wasn't there. And despite the risk, every night my grandmother would open the door, bring her friends in. Despite the fact that thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people died of starvation all across Greece, right? And they had nothing. Every day, Yaya would take food aside from her own mouth, from her own children's mouths, put it aside so her friends had something to eat when they would visit. And the girls would come in, they were seamstresses because they worked with Savas, and they taught my grandmother how to sew. Now my father remembers that oftentimes when Yaya would open the door and see her friends there and bring them inside, it would be the only time that day that he would see her smile. Savas and the girls and little Rosa, the 9-year-old girl, all survived the war. Now, this was common knowledge in my home, but I have to tell you, we're all sitting here like in amazement, like this is an amazing story, right? But when I was a young kid, growing up in New Rochelle, New York, and I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon, with everybody else, and to Boca and the Bloomingdale's, I didn't think that the story of Savas was really cool. I was like, okay, Yaya, that's great. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm going to go listen to Duran Duran now. Because that's, we love our grandparents. We're so proud of where we come from. But when you're that young, do you really pay attention? Right? No. I mean, I remember studying the Holocaust in school. I remember reading Anne Frank's diary. I never paid attention. I never thought that maybe Yaya's story was significant. I never stopped to ask the questions. Were you scared when the Nazis knocked on your door? Were you lonely when Bapu left for America? I never asked those questions, and life went on. life went on. I went on to journalism school. I became a journalist. I'm so fortunate, right? I get to travel around the world. I interview people and tell stories. But I never stopped to think about the most important story, the most significant story, the one that was in my home. As a journalism student, I went to Israel. My protective Greek parents were not very happy. It was during the first Intifada, the Palestinian uprising, and they were like, what are you doing? But I was drawn there. I had to go. I wanted to go study Mideast politics and the history of the Mideast conflict. So I went to Israel, and I learned. And the Palestinians would say to me, where are you from? And I would say, oh, I'm Greek. And they'd say, oh, you're one of ours. Come home with me. Let's make you tea. And then the Israelis would say, where are you from? And I would say, I'm Greek. And the Israelis would say to me, you're one of ours. Come home with me. Let's make you a meal. And that was not lost on me. And on that trip to Israel, my first trip to Israel, you'll soon learn why I've been back many times since then. On that first trip to Israel, I went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. And I remember walking through the Holocaust Museum, walking through the Garden of the Righteous, where trees are planted to honor those righteous Gentiles who risked everything to save their Jewish friends during the war. And I remember being emotional, and I remember with the other students, we were like, this is amazing. Oh my God, these people are so brave. They're so brave. They're so righteous. But you know what I never did? I never once thought about my yaya or her story. I never once put two and two together. It wasn't until years later, I was now a working journalist. And you're probably going to be amazed that Carrie Underwood actually was a big catalyst of this whole story, because I was interviewing Carrie Underwood at what was then Regis and Kelly. And I remember she had just won American Idol. Here's this cute little blonde girl, this nice singer, and she just like exuded this joy and this gift, and she was living her dream. And I remember looking at Carrie Underwood when she had just won American Idol, and she was just living her dream is the best way to put it. And I remember looking at her saying, I want to know what that feels like. I want to know what my personal dream is, because I spend my career telling other people's story. What's my story? Do I have a story? And I thought about that. And I said, well, maybe I can write a book. Maybe that'll be my story. But what would I ever write? How would I ever write a book? What would I even know how to write? What would I write about? So I asked everyone I know, all the very smart people that I have encountered in my work, and I asked everyone, how do you write a book? What's the #1 rule of writing a book? And everyone came back with the same response. If you want to write a book, you write what you know. You find the story that is uniquely yours, that you and only you alone are qualified and capable of telling. Because if it's not genuine, if it's not told from your voice, it won't translate to the page and no one will believe it. And so I thought about that. I was like, okay, what do I know? What story is uniquely mine? What do I know better than anybody else? And I realized what I know better than anyone else is what it is to be a daughter of Greek immigrants, what it is to be a granddaughter of a woman who was illiterate, who never learned to speak English, who never traveled anywhere except for her island and our home in New York, who, despite all of these things, was probably the most amazing and accomplished person ever. Because think of what she did. Think of what she and everybody who was just like her on that island did. Again, I always want to make it very clear, it wasn't just my yaya, it was all of them. All of them. They risked everything to save their friend. And I said, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to write a book, because I was overcome with this tremendous guilt. Because at this point, I was a mother. And I think that we can all understand, you get to a certain point in life, right? And you become a parent, and everything changes. You look at life through different eyes. You look at everything through a different perspective. And I remember holding my daughter and being overcome with this guilt, because I stopped and I thought, would I be able to do what Yaya did? Would I take food from her plate to feed another woman's child? Would I be capable of that? Would I open the door to allow other women's children into my home at risk of my own child's life? Would I be willing to risk my own child for someone else's? It's a lot to think about, right? It's a lot to think about. And for me, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that I'd be capable of it. And I was overcome with this guilt of, oh my God, I never paid attention. Look at what Yaya did. Look what she sacrificed. Look how incredible and strong and powerful. She beat the Nazis, right? They beat the Nazis. The Nazis went back. The family survived. You know, the poor islanders of Iquique won. And I never stopped to think or ask her about it. And it was overwhelming. And I channeled all of that guilt, everything, all of those emotions. And I sat down and I attempted to write a book, my first book. It's a novel, it's a piece of fiction, and it's called When the Cypress Whispers. And in that book, I had all the conversations with my Yaya that I never had. And in that book, I asked all the questions I never asked. And in that book, I fictionalized the story of a poor, illiterate, simple Yaya on an island who risks everything to save her Jewish friends. I didn't have enough information to write a nonfiction book, so I wrote a fiction book. And I took that book, and it took me about 1.5 years to write. And then I sent it out, right? I was going to sell this book, and it was rejection after rejection after rejection. It was 3 years of, I don't get it. I wish the writing was better. I don't think you'll ever be able to sell this. I'm sorry. But guess what? Like anything in life, it takes one person to believe in you, right? I found that one person in my agent, who's still my agent today. Not only did she sell the book, but that book, when I finally stopped to pay attention to my story, has been translated into 14 languages and is an international bestseller. Because I finally paid attention. But as I was writing that book, I realized it wasn't enough. It really wasn't enough, because I needed to ask more questions. And this is where the journalist in me kicked in, right? All those years of telling other people's stories and digging, asking questions. I started digging, I started asking questions and digging and digging. And through an extraordinary network of people all around the world, I set out to see if I could find the family that my Yaya helped save. I knew the names, right? Savas Israel, the tailor, Spera, Julia, and Nina. Those were the daughters. We knew they all survived. Savas died after the war and was buried on Iquique, just outside the Christian cemetery gate because there was no Jewish cemetery. But we knew the girl survived, and we knew that little Rosa, 9-year-old Rosa, whose entire family was murdered by the Nazis. She wasn't home at the time, which is why she survived. She was with Savas and his daughters. What became of them? We didn't know. We knew they survived. These people risked everything. How could they just vanish into thin air? What happened to them? What do they tell their children and their grandchildren about the islanders of Iquique? I was consumed. I had to find out. So I kept digging and digging. And again, dead end after dead end. You'll never find them. There are no records. I reached back out to Yad Vashem, and they were wonderful. And then I got an email saying, I'm sorry, it's a dead end. We can't find them. But through work of some extraordinary people, including the researchers at the website MyHeritage, guess what? I found them. We found them. There are 5 people alive today because of what happened on Iquique. Little Rosa, the 9-year-old girl, got married, had 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. They live in Israel. Spera, Julia, and Nina all got married but never had children of their own, but they survived. Spera got married and had step-grandchildren. Rosa had biological children of her own. I found them. I reached out. And when I first contacted Spera's granddaughter, I was in tears. I called her on the phone. I was like, I can't believe I found you. I've been searching for you. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And she was like, what are you talking about? She had no idea, because like so many Holocaust survivors, the women never spoke of the war. They never told their families how they survived. In Israel, Rosa was so traumatized by everything that happened, by losing her family, by being hidden, all of it, that the rest of her life, she was traumatized. Her children, her 2 incredible sons, Peretz and Avraham, grew up on Holocaust Remembrance Day. They had to be at home, mournful, quiet, mourning for the family that was lost, but they never knew who they were mourning for. They never knew who they were praying for because Rosa would never speak of her family or even how she survived. Nobody knew until I was able to contact them and fill in the lost history. Together, our families went back to Greece. We went back to Erikusa, we went back to our island, and they were able to meet some of the people who are still alive, who helped hide and save their mothers. Because I finally paid attention to my Yaya's story, there is a stamp in Israel with our little tiny island of Erikusa on it. Because I finally paid attention to my Yaya's story, the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation has deemed the entire island of Erikusa as a house of life. And I will share with you today, as I was back there signing books, I got an email. The Israeli Ministry of Education has incorporated my Yaya's story and the story of the Greek Jews, not just the Greek Jews of Corfu, but the Greek Jews, because they realized after hearing our story that they weren't teaching Greek Jews. Even people in Israel didn't realize that there was a community of Greek Jews during the Holocaust. So Israel is now teaching my Yaya's story to every high school student in Israel. And in fact, it was taught this week for the very first time. Thank you. Thank you. It's been extraordinary. It's been amazing. Just in June, I was in Israel with the families. Right there, we are connected now. I mean, Rosa and Spera's families are my families. We were all together in June at the Western Wall, dancing and singing, celebrating the bar mitzvah of Rosa's great-grandson. It's been incredible, and it's been eye-opening. And I think so many wonderful things have happened, and it's been so rewarding. But for me, I think the most rewarding thing, or one of the most rewarding things, has been to witness this through my children's eyes and to see what my children have learned and how I have learned by watching my children process, because there's more to the story. And this is where the story gets very difficult. Those of you who have read the book know. Those of you who have not might be a little shocked. Again, this is where the story takes a very difficult turn, but ultimately, just like what happened in Erikusa in the darkest moments of the Holocaust, there is beauty at the end of it. So I searched for years, right, to find the family my Yaya helped save from the Nazis. Years and years. And my children were basically sick of me at this point. You know, Mom's searching, we're going to do it, we're going to get it. But they were cheering me on. My whole family was cheering me on, and my children witnessed this. And when we finally, found them, I remember turning to my children and saying, oh, it's okay, thank you. I remember turning to my children and saying, look where you come from. Look what your great-grandmother did. She risked everything. She came from nothing, and she beat the Nazis. Look where you come from. Look that good can always overcome evil. Look for the light in the darkest moment, because it can and will shine through. You just have to let it in. Because in the darkest moment of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were murdered, the people on this little island said no. Ohi, right? We know that word very well. They said ohi, not here. And this family survived. And I kept drilling this into my children's heads. And then 3 days after I found the family my Yaya saved from the Holocaust, many of you will recall this. There was a shooting in Kansas at a JCC. 3 people were murdered by a man shouting Heil Hitler who wanted to kill Jews. 2 of them were members of our family. 3 days after I found the family my Yaya saved from the Nazis, my 14-year-old nephew and his grandfather were murdered in Kansas by a man shouting Heil Hitler who wanted to kill Jews. Imagine that. How do you explain that to your children? How do you begin to even rationalize that as an adult? How do you comprehend that? It's impossible. It's impossible. And, you know, I tried. How do I explain this to my children? And again, it was looking at this horrific tragedy through my children's eyes that I learned something. The night of the murders, the night that my nephew and his grandfather were murdered. My nephew, his name was Reet, and his grandfather is Bill. Reet was a singer. very gifted singer. And it was his dream to go to the singing audition. He had been waiting. He was finally old enough, and his grandfather was his biggest fan. So his grandfather drove him to the singing audition. And there was a man there, a white supremacist who was a member of the KKK. And he was waiting in the parking lot of the JCC because he wanted to kill Jews. And he shot and killed them as they exited the car because he thought they were Jewish. And then he went down the road to a village, to a nursing home, and he murdered a third person, a woman named Terry Lamano, because he thought she was Jewish. He murdered 3 people that day, all were Christians. I climbed into bed the night of the murders, and it was surreal. Couldn't comprehend it, even begin to. And my son Nico was 9 at the time. And Nico turned to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, "I don't understand, Mom." And I said, "I know, sweetheart. It's impossible. There's no one can understand." And he said, "But no, Mom, I don't understand. You told me the Nazis were gone and the family was saved. How could this happen? How could this happen, Mom?" I mean, as parents, what is our job, right? Our job is to explain things to our children. Our job is to present things to our children that they can understand, that they can feel safe and secure and know that we'll protect them. How could I do that in this situation? How could I explain hate and ignorance to my 9-year-old son when I don't understand them? How can I explain anti-Semitism? How can I rationalize that when it's irrational? And I thought about Nico's question, and it stayed with me, and I couldn't get his question out of my head. But then I realized something in the days and weeks following this terrible tragedy. Because I looked at my family in Kansas, and I looked at my cousin Mindy, whose son and father were murdered that day, and the entire family. And they all stood up immediately in the aftermath of the tragedy and said, "No, we will not allow our loved ones to be remembered as victims of hate crimes," because they were not about, Bill and Reet were not about hate. Reet was an Eagle Scout candidate, a high school student. Bill was a physician, like an old school family doctor. Like he loved his patients, he loved people. Reet was so full of life, he was going to do amazing things. They should not go down in history as victims of a hate crime. That's not who they were. They were catalysts of light and love and goodness. From the moment of that terrible night, our family in Kansas launched a foundation called the Faith Always Wins Foundation. And the goal of the foundation, and everyone in our family and the extended community, everyone has devoted themselves to bringing together people of different faiths for interfaith awareness and dialogue. Understanding that if you educate people about one another, you remove the stigma, you remove the fear, because what is hate but ignorance, right? It's ignorance. So if you remove the ignorance, if you educate people, if you teach them how we're all the same, then hopefully we can remove the hate so no other family has to endure what we have gone through. And Mindy, my dear cousin Mindy, has devoted her life to running this foundation, to bringing together people of different faiths, to make sure that her son and father are remembered for being catalysts of light and love. And I thought about that, and I looked at what Mindy and the family are doing with the Faith Always Wins Foundation. And I remembered what my yaya did and what happened on the island of Eriquisa, and I said, "All right, Nico, here's how I'm going to answer your question." Because 70 years ago, in the darkest moments of the Holocaust, something beautiful happened on that island. In the midst of terrible tragedy, you can make sure that you turn the narrative around and find something good to come from it, because we have to. And that's the difference between a victim and a survivor. And I looked at what our family in Kansas are doing with the Faith Always Wins Foundation, and I said, "See, do you see what's happening here with this foundation, with all the wonderful people who are coming together to make sure Bill and Reet and Terry are remembered for the wonderful people they are? Because there are acts of kindness happening now all around the country because they inspired it. Look, something beautiful is happening amidst this terrible, terrible tragedy." And I said to Nico, "Something beautiful is happening here." And that was the inspiration for my book, because I wanted so desperately to try to explain to my children that you always need to seek the light in the darkest moments. And we have to continually remind ourselves that, especially in the world we're living in today, when these things have not gone away. Did you ever think that more than 70 years after the Holocaust we'd be still having this conversation? It makes no sense. And yet we're here. And yet we're here. So we have to continue spreading the light and the love and the messages and opening our mouths like my yaya. As I said, this story is not unique. It's not unique. I told a story earlier. You guys know Maria Loy, the wonderful chef, Maria Loy. Maria, if you're watching, hi. Maria is extraordinary, right? And she's full of life and zest, and she loves to talk. Well, I was at a lunch with my editor, actually, at Maria's restaurant several months ago, and I brought my book, Something Beautiful Happened, and I put it down on the table, and Maria came over to say hello, and she looked down, and she saw the title, and above the title, it says that I'm the author of When the Cypress Whispers, and Maria started crying. And I looked at her and I said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And she said, oh my gosh, I didn't know you wrote that book. That book means so much to me. My father saved his Jewish friends during the war. Incredible, right? But again, not unique. It happened all across Greece. Now, my yaya told me this story of what happened on Edikusa. So many of her friends and relatives never said a word. Just like the victims of the Holocaust never talked, many of the islanders of Edikusa never shared with their families, never told their grandchildren what happened. Life went on. Philoptochos. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. No awards, no accolades. It was just what happened, and then life went on. It wasn't until later that we can put it into perspective, right? So my yaya had a big mouth. I've inherited her big mouth. And I'm encouraging others to have big mouths because, again, our family's story is incredible, but it's not unique because every single one of us in this room, everyone at home, everyone has a story in their family that is worthy of telling. And what we've also learned is that history does not exist in just textbooks. There's history in our homes because our story is now being taught in Israel to every high school student. And there are so many stories in this room worthy of being taught. And I think it's our obligation, honestly, to find the history in our homes and to ask the questions and to seek out these answers and to document them and to have big mouths. Because what I don't understand is why history remembers the names of those who commit the crimes. Why should we remember those names? Why should we remember Adolf Hitler's name? Let's remember the islanders of Edikusa who risked everything to save their friends. Let's remember everyone at Yad Vashem. If you read my book, which I hope you do, you'll notice I never once mentioned the shooter's name. He's insignificant. You'll never hear me say his name. You'll never hear any member of my family say his name. He doesn't matter. Bill and Reet matter, and Terry matter. So before I leave you and take some questions, I will encourage you. Keep talking using the Greek big mouths that we are inheriting in our Greek DNA, because we have them. Use your voices to seek out these stories and share them because they're important and they're significant and they matter. They really, really matter. And always remember the goodness. Let's not dwell on the ones who commit the crime. Let's celebrate the people that stood up and said, no, this is not going to happen, not here. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. Amy, do you mind grabbing me a water? Sure. Thank you.
Why do you think that the Greeks don't talk? Is it when the war was followed by the Civil War?
Right. Yeah.
And maybe there was just too much on their, that they just surviving was what they had to do.
And honestly, it's true. And the Civil War was even deadlier than World War II for Greece. I mean, much more so, right? I think that it's probably twofold. I think that, as you said, it's just so much. There's so much trauma. There's so much death and destruction. Surviving was the end game, was the goal, right? And the other thing is that I think that no one realized how significant it was. And I think it comes back to Philoptochos, because you don't do anything. They didn't do it for any awards or accolades, right? They did it because, thank you, because it was the right thing to do and there was just basically no other choice. So I know that in the case of Eriquisa, when I was able to go back and to introduce the families to some of the people who were still alive and say, oh, look, this is my uncle. He helped save your mother. He risked his life. He was like, well, of course I did. Why wouldn't we? It was just what you do. I think it's just ingrained and it's the right thing to do. Thank you. Yes.
I want to thank you for writing this book and for sharing your Yaya story that is compelling, that is beautiful, but it's an all-around story of love.
Yes.
And, unconditional love, not only to her family,
Right.
her community, but to the outer community. Now, thank you for listening to your Yaya. And thank you.
Finally.
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 And thank
Took me
you.
long enough.
Thank you for teaching us.
Thank you.
And telling us to listen to our stories and to our Yayas. The book is amazing. My Jewish friend bought it for me. I think that
Yes. Yeah.
came to you, and she shared, and she gave it to me at lunch one day. I knew you. I said, of course I know Yvette. I said, I've known her, and I said, I will read it. And that weekend, I could not stop reading it.
Thank you.
I couldn't put it down. I mean, just a beautiful story.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Any other questions?
I have
Yes.
a question and a statement. The question is, your grandfather that was never able to go back because of the war, what happened to him?
So after World War II, he was able to come back. Our family moved to Athens for a little bit, and then he was able to bring them to America, to the Bronx.
I
Okay.
go with the restaurant business
With
with my father.
Perry's father. My Babu and Perry's father were partners.
Right, and her grandmother is my nuna.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
The other thing is I had uploaded a video about the Greeks and Ohi, really. And there was, I'm not sure which the island they mentioned, but they showed a priest and the mayor.
Zakynthos.
Zakynthos,
Yeah.
okay, exactly, Zakynthos. And they said, we want the Jews, and the only two that came forward and said they were Jewish was the mayor.
Yeah, the mayor. Exactly. The bishop.
That was the
Yeah.
bishop, actually.
That was the bishop.
Yeah.
I thought priest, like a religious person. Like, I didn't know, but I know he was important. There was a lot of skits in that.
Right.
It was overwhelming. I was like,
And
yeah.
in Athens, our Bishop Damaskinos, right?
Archbishop.
Archbishop, yes, Damaskinos, he issued a decree and
Baptism certificate.
baptism to thousands of Jews. Archbishop Damaskinos in Athens issued thousands of false baptismal certificates that say Jews, and they also issued a decree to the clergy across Greece saying, it is our duty and obligation to save our Jewish brothers. And he encouraged the priests all across Greece to hide Jews in their homes. On Eriquisa, it was actually Father Andronikos left his home, and the family stayed in the Keli, and they hid in the priest's home. And then also, the Nazis got wind of what Archbishop Damaskinos was doing, and this is my favorite part of the story. And they wrote him a letter, and they said, we know what you're doing, cease and desist, or we will shoot you. And do you know how he replied? He said, in our church, tradition is that priests are hanged and not shot. Please respect the traditions of our church. Yep. So again, it happened all across Greece.
We have a couple questions online.
Sure.
So one is, awesome that it is being taught in Israel. Is it being taught in Greece? Your family's story.
No, not that I'm aware of. If we have any Greek educators out there, call me.
Okay. And we have another one. Will there be a third book?
I am working on another novel as we speak. This one actually starts off during the Greek Civil War. Yeah, in
And you'll come back and
Kerkina.
talk to
I
us
will
about it.
indeed, yes.
Any other questions?
So all your books are novels.
No,
This
my
one-
first, When the Cypress Whispers is fiction, that's a novel. Something Beautiful Happened is nonfiction,
Okay.
it's true, and now I'm working on another novel.
Okay, super.
And they're asking where they can purchase the books.
Everywhere, everywhere. Bookstores, Amazon. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys.